Board of Trustees of the American Water Works Association, New Jersey Section, and I welcome you to the 11th edition of the Living History Project. I am Neil Goldfein, and I currently serve as the chair of the Retired Professionals Committee and have been involved with the committee in the New Jersey section for many years. This year makes the 11th year of producing this project. For those of you who are not familiar with the Living History Project, the project is a documentary series where retired industry professionals have a one-on-one conversation about their water industry experiences. They share with us their stories and their viewpoints on the section and how changes in the state and federal regulations, technology, and social issues have changed the landscape for our profession. The main goal is to record and document the history of our section and the water industry of New Jersey. However, we hope that we will realize two additional benefits. The first is to encourage high school seniors, college students, and others to choose a career in the exciting and rewarding water industry. The second is to give young professionals in the industry a global perspective of how, when, where, who, and why we are and where we are today as an industry. The celebration of our 11th edition, I'd like to point out a few interesting facts about our past interviewees. We have had 26 first-hand interviews and 3 interviews that were done on behalf of the water utility professionals who are no longer with us. The interviewees include water industry executives from private and public utilities, service providers, regulators, and educators. The careers of a few of our interviewees have crossed between private and public utilities and between utilities, service providers, regulators, and educators. The average length of service for our interviewees is 41 years, and a number of our interviewees, while retired from their full-time positions, continue to participate in the industry either through volunteer efforts, knowledge-sharing efforts, or project work. A number of our interviewees have also proudly served our country. Each of our interviewees has had a distinguished career in the water utility industry. Without the interviewees' commitment to their career and to this project, we would not have this project. And before we begin this year's interviewees, here are a few more facts about the project. Originally, this series could only be viewed at the section's annual conference or upon request. Now, through the section's YouTube channel, many of our interviews can be seen on the internet. In 2013, the Living History Project received the AWWA Education Award. For many of the years, the project was recorded at various high schools using their audiovisual department's resources. In return, the schools received an honorarium from the section and an opportunity for their students to hone their craft. For a few years, when schools were not available, we had the help of one of our service providers. And now, on to our interviews. Welcome to the 11th edition of the Living History Project. Before I begin, I would like to point out what a small world this is. Both interviewees received their Bachelor of Science degrees in Civil Engineering from the New Jersey Institute of Technology, and both worked for the Village of Ridgewood Water Department at some time in their careers. Our first interviewee is Peter Nese. Pete received his BSc from Newark College of Engineering in 1976. He has taken continuing education courses at the Wharton School of Business, Rutgers University, and numerous courses provided through professional organizations such as the American Water Works Association and the Water Environment Association. During Pete's nearly 50-year career, he was involved with all phases of diversified projects in civil and environmental engineering for both public and private sectors. Projects included water and wastewater treatment plants, pumping stations, stormwater reservoirs, water storage tanks, water lines, sewer lines, sludge and biosolids facilities, solid waste, hazardous waste, and air pollution control. When Pete began his career, he was a union construction worker employed by contractors throughout Hudson County, working on heavy construction projects and high-rise residential buildings. He started as a concrete and pipe laborer and advanced to foreman. Pete also worked for the Village of Ridgewood in the engineering department. Responsibilities included studies, preparing design documents, and then serving as a resident engineer during the construction of sanitary sewers, storm drains, and road improvements. He also worked as a project manager in the engineering and construction division of the Ocean County Utilities Authority. For the remainder of his career, Pete worked for several consulting engineering firms, including LAN Associates, Engineers Incorporated, Camp Dresser and McKee, where he became a senior vice president, Jacobs Environmental as a senior partner and vice president, Schroeder Palmer as executive vice president, director of water resources, and CH2M Hill as vice president and senior client officer for numerous water and wastewater utilities in New Jersey. Throughout his career, Mr. Nese was associated with numerous professional environmental associations. He has extensively volunteered his time in leadership roles and has chaired committees for the Association of Environmental Authorities. He has served on the board of directors on 4 separate 3-year terms and was made a life member in 1990. For the New Jersey Water Environment Association, he chaired numerous committees and received numerous awards, such as the Section Award in 1985, the Harry P. Croft Award, the Select Society of Sanitary Sledge Shovelers Award, the award of the 55-gallon drum award, the Program Committee Award, the Golden Manhole Society Award. I guess if you stay around long enough, you get all these awards. The New Jersey Section Outhouse Award, that would be my favorite. Central Jersey Section, the John S. Crapper Award. He is a Water Environment Federation past director and now a life member. He received the Sidney Bedell Award. For the Society of Association Executives, he received the Leadership Award. For the New York Water Environment Association, he is a past secretary treasurer of the Metropolitan Section. For the American Water Works Association New Jersey Section, he's a past member of numerous committees. He is now a life member, and he is proud of his involvement in the formation of the Interfaith Prayer Breakfast at the annual conference in Atlantic City, which will be holding its 13th annual breakfast this year. He is also associated with the Air and Waste Management Association. He's a past chair of the Mid-Atlantic State Section. The Alliance for Action, he's a past chair of the Clean Ocean Coastal Committee and a past member of the Governor's Policy and Planning Committee. He is also associated with the Consulting Engineers Council, the New Jersey Marine Service Consortium. On a personal note, Pete is active in genealogy, plays some golf, and vacations often with his wife, Ginny. During the winter, Pete and Ginny spend most of their time in Florida. Pete has been politically active in his community. He was elected a county commissioner in Waretown, Ocean County. He is also a Eucharist minister in the Catholic Church. Pete has been married to Ginny Nese for 52 years. He has 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and is patiently waiting to become a great-grandparent in a few years. Now that I've properly introduced you by going over all of the elements of your illustrious career, we get to give you your turn to talk as I ask you a few questions about things that you observed in the industry over the years. How did you become involved or get started in the water and wastewater industry?
Well, kind of by accident, well, I'll say by the fate of God, relative to, I worked a number of years as a civil engineer, and as I continued along, I had a pretty good career, whatever is moving in the right direction. However, what happened was I wound up being laid off, which was the first time I had been laid off in my career of 12 years. And with the layoff, I was out of work for about 2 months. The problem associated with that was being out of work was not the biggest problem. My wife and I had just bought a house. We had a lot of things that happened to the house relative to flooding and a few other things. We put our entire down payment and everything we had by way of money on the house, so that now being out of work for a couple of months meant a lot to our livelihood, if you will. Accordingly, I reached out to all my friends, read a lot of newspapers, and tried to get a job. I finally gave up on that and desperately went to an employment agency, which I was not really looking forward to. The good news is they called me and said they scheduled an interview for me, but it was in New York City. I'm a Jersey boy, so New York City was not what I wanted to be dealing with. The second thing was they said it's going to be with an environmental engineering firm. I didn't know from Adam about environmental engineering. I knew civil engineering. So, long story short, what it left me with was an opportunity to go and see whether or not I could be successful in getting a job and seeing whether or not I actually would like it. I met with the chief engineer for the firm called Alexander Potter Associates. I met with him for a couple of hours. He was delighted with my background, and he hired me on the spot. He asked me if I could start the next day. I said no. I said, give me a couple of days and then I'll be starting. Once that started to roll through, if you will, I realized that Alexander Potter Associates was a subsidiary of Camp Dresser McKee. Now, I heard that name in the past. I knew they were a prominent firm, but I didn't know much more than that. So when I went home, I talked to my wife briefly, because I had not accepted the position yet. I said, I want to talk to my wife about it. Went home, talked to her briefly. She said, if you got to go to New York City, you go to New York City. And if you're into a different field, so be it. Let's just do what you have to do. So that's how I accidentally got into the arena. The other thing related to being in the water industry itself, with a consulting engineering firm, as I think most people professionally know, you're not necessarily isolated to just water. I wound up doing, as you introduced me, with the various things I've gone through: water, wastewater, solid waste, hazardous waste, clean air improvements, you name it. I did it in the environmental arena, and that was one of the joys of being with an environmental engineering firm. I had a diversity of projects because CDM was such a large firm. That pretty much talks about how I got there and the kinds of things I wound up doing.
Well, that's good. What changes did you see in the industry that most prompted a response from you, and how did you reply to some of those changes?
Well, if you're talking about changes as a business?
Anything.
Okay. In that regard, what I saw was we normally had small companies or relatively small companies as regionals. And once I was introduced to the larger company, I realized that there were lots of things that were going on in our organization that these smaller local and regional companies could not do. I also realized as I continued along that the smaller ones and many of the regional ones would no longer be around. You'd start to see what they call mergers and acquisitions start to take place. In that regard, I was involved, through the company in reviewing companies that we wanted to consider to acquire over the years, and participated in a number of those things too. So knowing that was going to be happening made it more comfortable for me, but it also was unique relative to what I had been used to in the prior years that I was working. Beyond that, I think that was the major thing that I saw happening by way of changes.
Did this industry consolidation of the engineering firms have an impact on the actual work that you did? Was it easier, more efficient? Did it have a positive benefit to the industry?
Well, when we started to work and compete with these smaller firms, we figured we've got our act together and there's no reason why they should be selecting a small firm or a regional firm, since we had all the experience and wherewithal to do the kinds of projects that were needed by the client or prospective client. We found out differently. A lot of local relationships maintained strong ties to local firms and even the regional firms. Accordingly, we didn't have as easy a job in, if you will, getting accepted in the state of New Jersey, as one example. So one of the things that happened on a corporate basis, to go back to corporate activities within CDM, was we changed some of the objectives that we had as a firm. And one of them was we needed to start to market our services as compared to think that we can just jump in and get accepted by someone else just because we're so good. And that was a bit of a challenge, but since I did so well in some of the project work that I was doing for the firm, they said, why don't we give Pete an opportunity to become our first marketing director? So here I was, no experience in doing marketing, some in doing business development by being out there and on committees and things like that and getting to meet different people in the industry. But I had to learn in the trenches how to become a marketing director. I went to various classes to try and learn, but the primary way of learning how to do marketing and business development was in the trenches. And we had challenges even within our whole organization, which at the time was probably a little over 2,000 people. But marketing was not a forte of CDM. It was with the old school, the New England type firm. We get calls from our clients. We don't necessarily have to go out there and chase them. And they didn't know New Jersey, New York, and the metropolitan area. I did, relative to knowing that it was going to be a big challenge. And what it finally came down to, I took on the responsibilities. I got to continue in the various committees that you talked about, got to meet lots of people who were relatively senior commissioners, executive directors like yourself, and to begin to show the kinds of things that the firm did, some of it casually, but some of it through being invited to actually propose on projects. And within 3 years, I increased the revenues coming into the firm tenfold. We only had $3 million a year coming in. By the time 3 years rolled around, I had $30 million a year coming in. So there were some impressive things that happened, and it wasn't with me alone. Pete Nese is good, but you need a team of people that are working with you to accomplish these things. So all I can say is we developed a number of managers who appeared like they'd have some good skills in marketing and formed a team. And then we started to do our marketing plans and all the other stuff that you do as a consulting engineer. And we had successes from that point forward. So it was a good time at CDM, and I was rewarded pretty well by way of the kinds of things, the titles that I got over the years. I started as a project engineer, became a project manager, a team leader, director of teams. Then this marketing director position came around. And then in the later years of my first 12 years with CDM, I became an area manager running the New Jersey office, which was one of the more challenging offices in the entire nation. That continued pretty much, but I'm giving you a taste of the kinds of things that happened in the industry, and kind of took us a little bit off guard relative to how are we going to get a better foothold in a particular area, but it happened.
Did the changes in the regulatory climate, I mean, the era that we operated in, there have been a lot of rules, laws, regulations, whereas probably prior to Earth Day of 1970, there was almost no legislation to protect the environment or to fund any of the needed resources for water and wastewater infrastructure improvement. Did the regulatory changes with all of the rules and regulations and laws have an impact on you in your career?
A tremendous, by way of number one, having the regulations touch water, wastewater, solid waste, hazardous waste, and for the 70s, 80s, and 90s, which was the majority of my heavy-duty shift in the environmental career, it was the best entree that I could have ever asked for. We had more opportunities than we ever would have believed. I had to do a number of things on the marketing side, and that was to start to get resources down into the New Jersey office that had some of the talents that we didn't have there. We had them in different offices. And you know New Jersey as well as I do. We like to have the people who were servicing us with their resources available, you know, at a call on the telephone. And accordingly, I was able to successfully transfer or hire a number of key people to the various market sectors that needed shoring up, if you will. And it turned out to be one of the best marketing plans I ever put together as it relates to being able to now successfully pursue numerous things that weren't available to us previously. Another tied item that took place, which I'll give myself a little bit of credit for, was I got to meet a lot of consulting engineering firms, competed against a number of them during my career, but got to meet a number of them. And there were opportunities that were sitting there also, namely, they had certain skill sets in their organizations that would not address, if you will, the needs of any of the clients that they were pursuing. So I was able to convince them that we would not try to steal, if you will, their client as compared to complement their firms with our capabilities and further impress them and hopefully allow us to get selected for the projects. And that worked extremely well. And I meant what I said to these particular consultants, that I would not be pursuing their individual clients, and I held to my word. Ethics it was and is very important in my entire career, and I feel I met the charge by way of never pursuing their clients. That's pretty much it. You know, it's there's so much more I could talk about relative to the various things that we did together as you know, other consultants, but it worked out extremely well, especially in light of all the environment regulations that prompted so many projects that we couldn't keep up with it in the business.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Describe some of your volunteer work, and you know, a lot of times when people do volunteer work, there's a real personal reward beside just the reward that the group gets by having volunteers. You can talk a little bit about your volunteer work with AWWA or any of the other environmental groups.
Sure. One of the places that I started out initially, since the first 12 years, I really didn't do anything other than the ASCE, and that was more just being a member and not doing anything with it. I started out when I went to the New York City office for CDM. I was asked whether or not I would consider being the Secretary-Treasurer for the Metropolitan section, which is an extremely large section, over 2,000 members. And I said, geez, I'm not sure I really want to get involved with this, but I was convinced by you may not know Marty Fogarty. He's a manufacturer's representative, but I got to serve on a couple of committees with him. And while I was serving on the committees with him, he says, I think you can handle this. Even though it's a large section, I think you can handle it. Well, I took it on. I did well with that. Then I got into the program committee for them and got to be known very well in the New York City and the New York State arena, if you will. That was the beginning. Once we opened up a New Jersey office in the mid-'80s, that turned me on to other kinds of things that I thought I needed to be doing. One of them was, I guess I can call the Village of Ridgewood back to the table again. Jack LaGrossa, who was the superintendent for the wastewater treatment plant, was a big advocate of having people join associations, and specifically to join New Jersey Water Environment Association. I refused. I said, no, I don't want to spend the money on that earlier. 12 years later, I got to see him at one of the conferences. He says, Pete, he says, what are you doing here? You're involved in New York, you're not involved in Jersey. What's going on here? So with that, I said, okay, I'll be a dual member. I'll join New Jersey. That started my activities in New Jersey Water and Environment Association. I found with a guy like Jack LaGrossa, who eventually became the executive secretary and then the executive director, he was a leader, and he made being on a committee fun. We worked hard, but we had a lot of fun together. So we got to meet a lot of other people from different consulting engineering firms, from different utilities. And with that, I was pretty aggressive relative to moving forward and taking on additional assignments that nobody else wanted. However, I did what I said I was going to be doing rather than just sitting back and watching other people. In going in that direction, what happened is I started taking leadership roles. I started to chair different things. I co-chaired the program committee until I was able to take it on myself, and then I chaired the program committee. And I was in the membership committee. I was in the public education, public relations committee. God, I don't remember all of them. And that's just New Jersey Water and Environment Association. I got involved with American Water, AWWA in New Jersey by way of being on their program committee for a number of years. I also wound up being on the Rules and Bylaws Committee, working with a number of people in trying to assess how the rules and regulations were, whether anything modifications needed to be taken place, and then finally, I wound up doing something that I was very pleased with being part of, and that was being one of the individuals who helped start the Interfaith Prayer Breakfast, which took place at the annual conference in Atlantic City. John Savardi, who I think everyone knows, at least in the water side of the business, came in my office one day when I was at CDM, and he was introduced to me by another individual you guys know well, and that's David Tansey. David had told John a little bit about me and the fact that I had started a prayer breakfast at New Jersey Water and Environment Association, and it mirrored the National Day of Prayer that used to take place by the President in Washington, D.C. each year in the first week of May. It happened to be coincident with our conference, so the board said, Pete, yeah, let's give it a shot, let's see how it goes. Well, 33 years later, it's still going on. And the board gave me a real shock 4 years ago when I came to the actual meeting that year. I knew what was going to be going on and whatnot. I knew that my breakfast was set up. I had a speaker already set up. And then when I walked in to start the activities, I was briefed by one of the board members. In fact, the president, I think, came in and said, Pete, we just want to announce to everybody who was here at the breakfast that we've named the breakfast after you. So it's the Peter A. Nese Annual Prayer Breakfast. And I said, this is usually done in memoriam and not when someone's alive. Can you tell me anything about my health that I don't know? Yeah. So anyway, it was a real honor to be selected, you know, and have my name in lights, if you will, but I didn't do it for any reason where I was looking for any kind of acknowledgement as compared to doing it because I felt that was, I was kind of given an opportunity by the Lord to do that and to pay thanks to him. I could go on and on with the other places that I've been active with. Mid-Atlantic States Air and Waste Management. I was the chairman of the Mid-Atlantic section, and that was over 2,000 members also. So another big hurdle to take care of. Was involved in several committees besides, you know, being the chair, and I did a lot of traveling with that because it went down to the Virginias all the way up through New England. So it had a big territory, and I really enjoyed it, but it was a lot of hard work. And that's what all of these committees are, a lot of hard work. But when you got a lot of people who are interested in truly the association and not where they're going to be going because they're on a committee, what happens is you have fun with it. So all the work pays off by way of value to the associations. That's pretty much it.
Okay. Do you have any advice you'd like to give to anyone beginning their career in the wastewater industry, or for people about to end their career in the industry, moving on to retirement?
Well, that sounds like two things. Well, let
Yes.
me focus on the first part of it. One of the things I found was that I missed out on a number of things the first 12 years of my career, because I never got involved with any associations. And that was probably the worst thing I could have done. So one of the things I'd say to anyone who was getting involved in the water industry, wastewater industry, is to go and join an association. Try to find a mentor in that association if at all possible. And the best way to do that is to join a committee. Somehow they'll ask you to do an assignment and whatnot. They'll see how well you do it, and then all of a sudden you'll be asked to do something else, and you'll get to meet a lot of people. That's also something that's good for your career, relative to if, in fact, you should be out of a job. The best connections that you have to another possible job is having friends in the industry who have gotten to know you, and basically reach out to them first. Going to the newspapers is not the best way to try and get a job. I found that out the hard way.
Right.
The other thing is, if someone is just joining a firm and just getting out of college, if you will, truly finding a mentor in the organization that they join is critical. If you're just out there being lost in the crowd, you're going to get frustrated as an individual, and the firms are going to get frustrated because you may not you wind up liking what you're doing, not because you don't want to, but more a matter of someone put you into a spot that you really weren't suited for. Not that we don't do that to all entry-level people. We make them do everything that no one else will do, and then we carry them along to other more, what we say, enjoyable assignments. I think those are some of the key things I'd say that they need to do. Oh, one other thing, when you're in your first 3 to 5 years with an organization, you want to try to get to all the phases of engineering that you might possibly face in the future, namely doing studies and reports, doing designs, getting involved with construction, sometimes if you have the capabilities, getting involved with operations, where you have operators, wastewater operators, water operators, which CDM did have. We had an operations group. So getting them to give you a taste of each of those areas to see whether or not, in fact, you want to go into a particular arena. Then getting a taste of the different disciplines is another thing. And that's one of the joys, as I think I mentioned earlier, that I had at CDM and a few of the other environmental firms I had worked with in the past. And that is having a diverse type of projects that you're working on gives you a lot of satisfaction and gives you a lot of enthusiasm. It did me, because I had a thirst for new things. I read quickly, I gained knowledge quickly, and then I exercised it by way of doing various projects, and I was rewarded accordingly. So by way of retirement, having been retired now, I'm in my 6th year of retirement, I could say there's a couple of things you really need to consider. Number one, that you're financially sound when and if you want to retire. Going into retirement and not having the ability to be able to take care of yourself and your spouse becomes a challenge, and money is the root of all evil when it comes to arguments that take place, whether it's early in your career being married or later when you can't do the kinds of things you'd like to do. Finding the right kinds of things that you like, and it doesn't have to be work related, it could be volunteer activities and whatnot, and I did a lot of things myself as it relates to volunteering, in addition to being involved with politics and whatnot. I did a number of other things. But the genealogy was one of my things that I absolutely love. I do a little golf, not as good as you do, but I do play
Well,
golf
not as
also.
often. Maybe as good, but not as often.
But anyway, having the opportunities to do different things was good, but finding something that you truly like is more important. I found for me also that quickly going right into retirement was a bad thing for me. I went into semi-retirement and then started to find things that I would enjoy personally outside of that arena, so that when full retirement came along, I knew that I would have a full plate, if you will, of things that would keep me busy, but keep me happy also. And traveling, as you mentioned, Ginny and I we're in a travel club, so we travel a lot during the year, but we also have a place in Florida, and the winters we hate New Jersey, like a lot of people have, I guess, found out once you get retired. You really don't want to be around an area if it's too cold. So Ginny and I wound up buying a place, and we spend a good 4 to 5 months out of the year down in Florida. So that's how we keep ourselves busy.
Okay, well, Pete, I want to thank you for volunteering your time today to come here and do this little interview and taping, and it's been fun for me.
Thank you.
I hope it's been enjoyable for you, and I think we're going to go and find our next interviewee.
Thank you very much, Neil. I appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Pete.
Thank you.
It is my pleasure to introduce Frank J. Moritz. Frank's remarkable career includes service with investor-owned and municipal water utilities, as well as a major utility contractor. Frank was the Director of Operations for the Village of Ridgewood Water Department from 1991 until his retirement on July 1, 2015. Prior to that, Frank had a diverse and interesting career working for Western Electric Corporation from 1966 to 1969, United Water from 69 to 87 as an engineer in their corporate office, and for J. Fletcher Kramer & Son Incorporated from 1988 to 1991 as Director of Pipeline Rehabilitation. Frank received a Bachelor's of Science degree in Civil Engineering from the New Jersey Institute of Technology in 1979. He has also taken numerous courses in water and wastewater. He is a licensed water distribution operator and a licensed water treatment operator. He is a certified public works manager and a certified recycling professional. He has been a tireless volunteer with the New Jersey section of the American Water Works Association. Frank has served as trustee, section chair, and represented New Jersey as a national director for AWWA. He has also served on numerous committees, chairing the Vendor Exhibits Committee. He received the George Warren Fuller Award in 2004 for engineering excellence in service to the American Water Works Association. He has also been an active member, officer, and volunteer with the North Jersey Water Conference and the Loyal Order of Moose. And also, since Frank told me today, there are many other awards that he did not give to me. We'll start out. Tell us a little bit more about your career, Frank.
Well, it started off, ironically, not in the water utility direction. During my tenure working for Western Electric, the following year my brother had graduated high schools, and I got him a job working in the same department as I was in. And after 3 years that I was there, he left to find some other employment, and he had applied to then Hackensack Water Company. And the personnel director told him then, you really don't have the qualifications to work here yet, the experience. And he said, well, my brother does this and my brother does that. He said, well, tell him to apply. And that kind of I did apply at that time, and I was in the water utility industry, for the most part, the rest of my career. So if it wasn't for the fact that my brother switched jobs, I probably may have gone in another direction.
Well, that's very interesting. It's always surprising how people get into the field. What changes in the field? I mean, again, we've had long tenures here. What changes have most influenced you or you've had to respond to during your career?
Well, I guess because of the diversity in the sections of my career, working for a private utility, you didn't have the the bidding laws you didn't have, a lot of the constraints that you have working for municipal government. In between those two jobs, working for J. Fletcher Kramer, what I learned a lot about was the business and how to run a business and how to run and supervise a lot of people that, over 100 people at any given moment and move around. For that particular job, we moved around the country a lot. So the changes I saw were basically in the operations of how you conducted yourself and how you got your days, you began your day and ended your day. And I guess you having your experience in the industry, we didn't really have ours. Our day was whatever consumed us, and that's the way you did it. But I would say the big changes for me, on a personal note, was learning how to operate within municipal government as versus private industry. And in the previous two jobs, they were both private concerns. So again, as I mentioned before, the bid laws, the political end of it that you never really had to deal with, the ability to negotiate terms was changed. There was really no negotiation in municipal. You had to abide by certain laws, and that's what you did. And I guess the other things that I found changed, technology was the biggest change, I think, for all of us. We were all guided by EPA and NJDEP, and the more technical ability they had to evaluate contaminants or different things that impacted us in water, the changes in levels that we had to meet, on and on, going, through our careers and into the future, are all going to be governed by the ability to measure what's contained in water or anything else that affects our lives. So I think technology was probably the biggest factor in your everyday work and how you approached it in the water utility.
Okay. I think it's interesting that you pointed out that one of the things that you learned being in the private industry was how to manage a staff, and certainly the rules are different. Can you give me any examples when you got into private industry and got into the public sector, that all of a sudden it was different in your ability to have an understanding of management and business principles? Sometimes with the public sector, it's like a foreign language.
Well, that's true, and you really had to learn the different parts of that so-called language. In a private utility such as United Water, if you put a project together and you wanted to put it out for bid, you would say, well, I want to put it out to these three contractors because I know they're the best at what this job is going to be all about. In a municipal government, that same project could be bid on by 20 companies. You don't always get the company you feel is best qualified, but as long as they prove themselves and have the capacity to carry out the job, you had to award it to them. Did that always work out? No. In some cases, it cost more of your time to monitor and go over and make sure they met all the different parts of the project that they had to meet. So I would say that the big difference in that is you also had the ability to negotiate. In private industry, if we had three contractors, you could sit down and say, well, you were getting X amount from one contractor, and I think this is more valuable. Can you also include that? So you had that negotiation ability, which you didn't have in municipal government.
You have any particular positive or horror stories in the public sector where your contract, without naming names?
You know what? We had some that you had to kind of guide them through the final phases of the job. It's always the final 10% of any project that's the most difficult to get done. And with the better contractors, they wanted to get in, get out, and get it done, and maximize their profits. Where some of the other contractors that might have had less faith in, just couldn't finish that punch list, and in some cases, I did run into some that didn't, and then you run into penalizing them, and you end up with some legal problems to get the job completed, and you go on to, trying to get a different contractor to come in and finish up. So yeah, it does happen in the industry, especially in municipal government.
You also mentioned substantial changes in technology beside the ability of DEP to be able to test more. Do you have any examples of technology that you particularly liked and you were able to implement in either United Water or Ridgewood?
Well, in especially running in the Ridgewood water utility, what you did come to find was in order to meet certain criteria of service to the people, you no longer could do it with inside staff as far as engineering and consulting help. So you had to depend on outside consulting firms to come in and bring their expertise in to get a project done. And so I think the big change there was that you got to understand what a lot of the consulting firms could bring to the table, and again, the jobs by their nature kind of predicated what some of their expertises were and who would be interested in coming in and working with your utility. I would say from the utility end of it, I guess one of the major projects that everybody pretty much undertook was the changing over of metering conditions and how meters worked and what the meter can deliver, and what it measured was no longer just sending a meter reader out to read to read a meter. The new automatic meter readers came into play, and I think what you found was you no longer could you just be that old utility that the meters were 25 or 30 years old and you were losing revenue. You no longer could operate like that when you had the ability to measure every drop of water that went into a household, and also you learn the usage propensities of how your consumers use the water and when they made use of the water. So I think that was a big issue. And I guess the final one, working in Ridgewood, was really the summer demand was difficult because you were working with limited supply. So it was always being able to manage that demand, whether it would be limiting the amount of water used by consumers through various stages, or interconnections that you could make, major interconnections with larger utilities or private utilities.
Where did most of the supply for Ridgewood come from?
Ridgewood operated off of about 54 ground wells, so it was all groundwater. And in the winter, our demand might have been 6 or 7 million gallons a day, but in the summer it could go triple that. And the wells just didn't have. We were probably maxed out somewhere around 12 or 13 million that we could deliver out of the wells, and so you had to rely on your tank supplies and everything to back that up. And when that got low, then you went into restrictions, and very few years did we not have to restrict water usage.
How did that play out with your customers, your consumer group?
Well, the majority of the clients or the consumers were, and it was an affluent area, and some expansive vegetation outside the house, and nobody wanted to lose that, and so a lot of times it wasn't looked on very well by our consumers, because the average person doesn't understand that, while you're watering your lawn or while you're consuming that water, and there could be a fire down the block and not enough water to put it out, that didn't fall into their venue. That's what we had to consider, fire protection and supply to everybody.
Any head-to-head confrontations?
From some of the other towns that we served, they couldn't understand how, we could be in that position. But, if you don't understand how to operate a water utility, then it took some time and explanation. And I guess in the political world, they had to put on a certain face for their public. And so even if in the times that they understood what I was saying, they never would come out and say it, because that's not what got them their votes. So you had to play in municipal government, you had to play politics too.
Yeah, that's interesting. This is the last 2 weeks, bridging 2017 and 2018, has probably been the longest period of consecutive days below 20 in my memory. And so I know we've had some bad weeks. How did the extreme cold over long periods of time affect Ridgewood's water utility?
We dealt with some areas of freezing, but for the most part, everything operated fairly well, even in the cold weather. Your biggest detriment would be water main breaks in that kind of weather, where if you couldn't get that shut down right, it was an enormous task to get it repaired. a couple of feet of ice on the ground, and the guys jumping in the hole trying to work through that was pretty difficult. So I guess you know, when we hit those periods, that was the biggest issue, was water main breaks.
Yeah, there's been something, and I've been reading in the papers lately over this period where they're blaming a lot of the breaks on the aging infrastructure as opposed to the depth of frozen ground surface. Do you have any opinion on that?
Well, I think that, you know, any utility, I mean, depending on its age, you know, I think toward the south of New Jersey and probably western New Jersey, the infrastructure is probably a little bit newer. When I say newer, it's still old by comparison. But when you get up into the northwestern, I think, sections where pipe's been in the ground for 140 years or 150 years, you're going to expect some deterioration. When we did pipeline rehabilitation, I can remember observing a piece of pipe that was installed, a 30-inch pipe, cast iron, that was installed in 1881. And that pipe still had a lot of its integrity, albeit full of tuberculation, which was eventually cleaned out and cement lined to prevent that. But I think that the infrastructure, there's just not enough money put into the infrastructure. At some point, you either have to determine what is viable to do, whether it's rehabilitate the pipe or replace it. But you need to do that study in any water utility. And I think most of today's water utilities have a good handle on what has to get done. The fact of the matter is, how much money do you have and how much disturbance does that cause when you have to do it? But as you know, the money is, it can be very, very expensive. You're talking about most of the time digging up a street that's a thoroughfare in a main area, main shopping area, and digging it up and replacing it, and that puts a major inconvenience on the towns and on the people and the public itself. And again, this is very costly. You know, what we used to say, oh, you can buy a piece of pipe for $6.25 a foot. Well, you know, those days are gone. I don't even have an idea, but I'm sure it's over $40 or $45 a foot today to buy pipe. But you know, I think the infrastructure really need to be looked at, and if there's programs, and I know, you know, the NJDEP, they had programs to help financially support those needs, but I think on the overall picture, more work has to be done.
Okay, that's good. What about changes in regulations? Because you mentioned that before, that beside DEP having an ability to test for more contaminants, they've also at least in the 70s and 80s, were a regulation mill. I mean, they put out a lot of regulations and a lot of controls. How did that impact your career?
Well, you know, when every time a regulation would come out, and you know, I want to say everybody was always, because of lack of understanding immediately, you were always a little bit behind the curve. So by the time you caught up to the curve, you know, some of the regulations came out with, okay, I'm on board with this. Now there's another set of new ones, and you get a little behind the curve of that. So it takes a long time to get to the point where you can say, you know, I've had some violations in my system, and I've got a stack of like this to do, till you get it down to a point where there's only a couple of pages. But it's a constant process every year, because you know, every year you get a small change. You don't get big changes today, because I think we've gone through those major changes from the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. I think that's when we saw the major impact in changes. You know, you're always playing catch up.
Now, when I introduced you, I mentioned that you're a past chair of the New Jersey AWWA section, and you're a past national director. Actually, I think it's international director now.
Yes.
We've expanded to Canada and Mexico. Talk about some of your experiences and the things you got out of that.
I mean, all my involvement, whether it was beginning with North Jersey Water Conference and going through the various committees there, and eventually into the chairs and becoming president, and then transcending into AWWA, the same thing, heading up many of the committees, whether it was small systems or technical and programs or vendors, the different things and the different people you meet. It's just, the water industry itself is just full of good people. It just seems like everybody you meet is, you know, is conducive to having a conversation, and you talk about the industry, and at the same time you become friends. And I think, you know, even in my retirement, I said I made a lot of acquaintances, but I made a lot of friends. It wasn't business acquaintances, it was more friends. And I think that the AWWA, especially going through all the chairs and the various committees, has made that possible. Even up to and including the national director, where you met similar people from 48 different other locations, and you got to know those people, and they became your friends, and you looked forward to seeing them at the next meeting, and you just develop I have some lifelong friends since I was the international director, and we still keep in touch. And it's a great industry, and I would highly recommend it to anybody that's thinking about it.
Any little anecdotes you can give me? I remember one time when you were giving your speech as the chair at the annual conference at the dinner, had a little interruption.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, that'd be a lifelong experience. The person in charge of catering, as I was at the microphone, had called me over, and my wife of 46 years knew right away that something wasn't right, and she told me that they had a call that my home was on fire, and that I had to get home as soon as possible. And here I stood dressed in a tuxedo, and my wife's all dressed up, and my family is out there, and all my friends and constituents, and like, all right, now how do I remove myself from here and without making this a big to do? So I just kind of excused myself and got through a couple things, and then I had some of my relatives kind of pack our stuff up and let us leave, but pack our stuff up and get you out, and I think that was probably the fastest I made it home from Atlantic City to Hasbro Kites. And of course, the rest is history. Not good history, but we're back in the house, and things are normal after a year. But that was a never to forget thing, and a definite experience.
Yeah, and I particularly remember that because I was the next speaker.
Okay.
So I went on a lot early.
Yeah.
And well, that's interesting. And as a national director, you travel a lot?
Our meetings were, well, you always had a meeting at whatever the national conference was. Then you always had a meeting. We did San Antonio, Puerto Rico. We had meetings in different places, and that was a benefit for you, definitely. And I think that's what made people, the fact that they moved it around was good for all the other international directors that represented the other states that are involved. So the organization itself is a great organization.
Do you have any advice that you would give to someone just entering the industry?
Yeah, my advice would be, and I think if you go back and look at the AWWA's young professionals, it's really what that's about. A lot of the young engineers or people that are working, not only in consulting firms, but for the utilities, and is to get involved with you could be North Jersey or South Jersey or AWWAs, to get involved. But it's difficult because you're not always supported by your company because you're young, and that you don't have the position yet that the company would finance your membership or your meetings. So I think it's important that you, as a young person, if you have the interest and the drive to be a big part of the water industry, that you may want to make that investment yourself to be part of the organizations, that you make acquaintances, you learn the different things and different ways that people operate, and you pick up a lot of stuff along the way from these people on how to do your job better. And the other thing is, that I would say that is the most important thing if you want to get ahead is, when the door opens, you walk through it, and whatever's presented in front of you, you do it. You don't say no to anything. You evaluate what you got, and you move ahead. If you don't take that step, you don't broaden your horizon, and you don't broaden your knowledge. So I think you have to do that. Always look forward to doing more. Keep the door open and do more.
Would you have any advice for people that are about to retire?
I think financially, I'm sure you've heard that. That's important, and you need to belong to, I think, stay with some of the organizations that you originally belonged to, whether, stay participant in AWWA, or I'm still on the board of trustees for North Jersey Water Conference, so I'm active in running some of their committees and the different things they do. I'm also belonging to another organization known as the Loyal Order of Moose, which I guess even with that, it keeps me busy. And I always said I just wanted to be a member, but that didn't work out. It became, I went all the way up that food chain too. So I am very much involved with that, and there is a certain reward for that kind of volunteerism. We support in that organization. We support children and seniors, and it goes a long way, not only to keeping you busy, but also to keep your mind, on the ball, on your eye on the ball of life, and the changes that are there that you can help make.
Looking back over your career, were there any mistakes that were made? Anything that glares out as something you might have done differently, or something that happened that you just had a hard time fixing?
In the industry, I can't really, can't really say that there were mistakes that I can conjure up that I felt were impacting my future or where I was going. I think it was more of, you always question, well, if I'd have made this decision, so you might go back and question some of the decisions. I don't think I might have questioned the decision about, let's say, leaving United Water at that time and taking another job or another added responsibility, or I might have questioned going. You doubt, even though you said yes, you doubt whether, okay, did I make the right decision? And then when you look back, you say, at the end of the day, yeah, it was the right decision. So I think you might question yourself along the way, but I can't think of anything glaring that I would say I would like to take back and redo.
And as you talked about, your career, you always accept other responsibilities. People want you to do more. You do it because it broadens your own horizon. You get a value out of it. But then, that then sometimes conflicts with your home life. How did you balance your work life and your home life?
I leaned a lot on my wife to balance the home life better for me, really, because sometimes you just put in a lot of hours. I know even in my last position, as director of operations, that was consuming into the fact that at this time of the year, if it was a major snow event, my presence had to be felt, and I had to be involved and been there making decisions to, how to get the snow cleaned up, what to close, what to open, and or even different things. Do you cancel the garbage pickup? Do you cancel recycling? Do you, just different things that come on with the responsibilities. So, again, that was another door that opened, and then I walked into and said, okay, now I have to learn a little bit more about this. But, it's all goes to how much drive you got, where you want to get, where you want to be, and how successful you want to be.
Okay. Do you have a mentor in the industry? Do you have somebody that you looked up to, or that you regularly, when you were early in the industry?
I would say the chief engineer was a big impact on me for United Water, John Canizzo. I don't know if you knew John. Yeah. He always supported everything. I did all my engineering education at night, so I worked full time for him, but he always encouraged me and mentored me through moving forward and eventually getting the position of engineer with United Water. And I would say he's probably a good person that I would say mentored me. I learned some things in private industry working for Fletcher Kramer, how he ran his business and what he expected, and what, if you ran a business, what you should expect and what you should expect from your employees to deliver, and how to keep them moving forward. So I would say those two particular people were probably mentors in my moving on. And I don't want to say that some of my associates, Tom Dawson or Ron Tatham, when I got into the municipal government, they were supportive, and if I had any questions, because running a municipal water utility was different for me, they were supportive and always there for me. So I would consider them some of my mentors also.
If you could pick a favorite moment in your career, I mean, sometimes we have an epiphany, sometimes we don't, but if you pick a favorite moment in your career, I know you've gotten lots of awards, you've changed jobs a few times. Favorite moment in your career?
That would have to be, in the career-wise, that would have to be the Fuller Award, to be recognized by your peers as being a person deserving of that award. I think that means, and I think from your own experience, what that means to you as a person who's been involved in the water industry for all the years that we did work in it. That's probably the one thing that I would say I carry close to my heart as being one of the best things that happened to me as far as career.
Okay. Well, Frank, I want to thank you. It's been very interesting. I want to thank you for volunteering your time for this today.
My pleasure.
And you will now be immortalized.
Great. Neil, thank you.